Tuesday night feels like Christmas Eve. Living between Wednesdays.
What's up, folks? I'm your host, Conrad, on Wednesday Night Reviews, and tonight I'm joined by Fred Kennedy, author of Dead Romans. Fred, thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me on the show. I'm the last guy from the crew on the show. This is good.
You actually are, in a rare and very cool sequence. I have now interviewed the editor, the artist, and now yourself, the writer.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of pumped. This is kind of cool. I get to finish the series up.
I'm stoked.
Perfect. Then, Fred, my first easy question, the same question I ask everybody, for the folks who've maybe never seen your face, maybe never heard your name, who is Fred Kennedy?
Well, I work on the radio. I'm actually in the side studio of Q107 right now, but my day job is I work as a radio announcer on Q107 in Toronto. Before that, I was on The Edge. I used to work on Teletoon. I was the only live person. Actually, no. There was two. Sorry, Andrea. I forgot, and I'm a jerk. But I was the first, and then Andrea came in before. Andrea, Jenna, and I were the live hosts on Teletoon. And then I hosted Fred at Night for about 7 or 8 years on Teletoon. And yeah, so I've worked all over. So,
wow, that just unlocked a memory. Thank you,
Fred. Yeah.
Wow. Boom. Okay.
Yeah. That was a good time. That was honestly one of the funnest jobs ever. It was the classic Canadian TV kind of crew. We had the same crew, like lighting, camera, sound, makeup, production for years. We went to a bunch of different places, like San Diego Comic-Con, New York Comic-Con. It was always the same group of people always going to these things. And it was the raddest experience ever. It was a great time. I miss that era.
Oh,
yeah, it was good.
Yeah, I mean, I bet, especially if your team is that, when you think that highly of them, so one, there must be good people, talented people. So I bet you had a hell of a sync when it comes to teamwork and being able to go to see all these cool things, all the cons, do the coverage you did. So that's awesome. Congrats.
We had this, she was the makeup lady and wardrobe director. Her name was Santa Young, and she was like the mama bear. She was the best. She's the queen. And, it was like, I think that honestly, like her influence was profound in the whole studio. Like when she walked in, she kind of like commanded the set. Like you name the show, like History on Film, Sunday Night Sex Show, like all the big Canadian staple TV classic, like The Zone. She did all the makeup and like costuming and wardrobe for those shows for years and years and years. Like the PJ Fresh Phil era of YTV, that's the same makeup and wardrobe lady. She owned the set. Like when I think about one of the reasons why that era of TV for me was so good, it was because having somebody that solid and professional in the room. Yeah, we're totally off topic, and I'm sorry. I'm train wrecking you. I'm sorry.
No, I love it. It's cool because you know what? Like I find all the comic creators that I've got to interview have such insane diverse backgrounds. Like one of the previous guests I had who made the comic Narita, they're an artist, a musician, curator. They ran their own art studio for a while, and it was just like, that's wild. I've interviewed folks like Chris Wygand, who made Tights here. He's a graphic designer by day, comic artist at night, which he's hoping to flip, I think, and I think he's on his way to it. So yeah, I've interviewed all sorts of folks, so it's great to hear that kind of story, and I think it speaks to how sort of you will conduct yourself because of it, which is just cool.
Well, if I screw up, Santa's gonna get mad at me. It's interesting. Like her fingerprints are across Canadian television for decades. She's the best.
Awesome. But yes, we are here to talk about your work. So, for the folks out there, Fred, you have written Dead Romans, and just today, that's the second one, cover B, I believe, cover for 3, and the one that came out literally today, I picked it up 2 hours ago, Dead Romans number 4. Fred, what is this thing I'm holding? What is it?
Oh, that is, so this cover specifically or the story as a whole? So issue 4 has 2 specific covers, and one features Honoria, who's one of the main characters. It's her and Arminius are the main characters. And it's her as like a Germanic tribal queen, and then as a Romanic empress. And it sort of represents, because it's in issue 4, that she has an opportunity to sort of decide where she's going. Yes, exactly, right there. She's sort of coming face to face with the reality of her situation. And so Nick and I really batted back and forth about what we were going to do with this cover. Initially, there was supposed to be a Roman body on a funeral pyre with coins in their eyes to go across the river. And then with the coins back and forth. I love the romantic cover, that one that's on the screen right now. I personally like that one. Everyone loves the Germanic Queen, the one with the antlers. They're so great. I'm not saying either one is bad. I think they're both absolutely incredible. Nick has been knocking it out of the park with his covers consistently. I got a really very kind and supportive message from Kelly Tyndall about these today, talking about how much he loved the covers on this series. But the story came together because I'm Canadian, but my dad's military, so we lived in Belgium for like most of my childhood till I was 12.
Oh, okay.
And then we were at a dig site, like a sort of like a Roman archaeological dig, sort of recreated Belgii pagan village, a tribal village, and it was by this famous battle where Julius Caesar fought. And Julius Caesar actually mentions this battle in his book, The Gallic Wars. And so seeing that as a little kid, and I was in like the 3rd or 4th grade, you don't really understand the gravitas of the situation, but you think it's cool because Roman soldiers and like swords and armor, you think that stuff's really neat. And you're dealing with like being in Western Europe with all kinds of castles and everything everywhere, all over the place. But the Roman stuff seemed really cool. And so I remember it was right around then, after me pestering about it, my mom got me some Asterix and Obelix comics, and reading that. And so reading those, as silly and childish as they are, there's all kinds of little tidbits about that era in it. And then you sort of, it plants a bug. And I think when the kids are little, you can't really inundate them with fact. You got to keep them grounded to a sense, but it's not so much hitting them with fact as planting a seed and a desire to learn.
Yeah.
Finding something they think is cool. I'm learning that with my kids now too. And you just want them to get excited about things and want them to be interested in things. And I became really interested in Roman history because of that. And I don't know if there's like a clear path between that and this, but I know that if it hadn't been for things like that, I may not have ever been as interested as I was. And I remember reading about the Teutoburg disaster, and Herman the German, and Hermanus and Arminius and all that stuff. And that is what really like drove me to tell a story like Dead Romans, because the Varian disaster, the Battle of Teutoburg Forest, it is staggering in its magnitude. You've got like 50,000 Romans going into a forest. Exactly. Yeah. You got 50,000 Romans going into a forest and then getting absolutely decimated over a few days. And you're not dealing with a time where you can just like pick up the phone and figure out what's going on. It's like, no, it's like, they're just, the numbers, and these are just the soldiers. And it's like, it's staggering. It's mind blowing to think of the numbers that are involved in this situation. And after this battle happened, the legions that were destroyed were never replaced. Those legions were gone for the rest of the existence of the Roman Empire. There were no 17th, 18th, and 19th legions.
What a deadly blow then. Like, that's crazy amounts of damage to the great Roman Empire. Which,
and you take a look at the language line in Europe exists because of this battle, because Rome never conquered or attempted to pacify Germania again. They never tried to make it a province again. And you look at the language line, everything that is west of the Rhine is Romanic languages like Spanish, French, etc. And then you got east is all Germanic based languages. You can't really include English in that because English is just a mess of a language. It's like it's a mess. It's a Germanic structured language with Latin grammar laws and French root words all through it. It's a mess of a language. But if you take a look at that language line, it's there because of the Battle of Teutoburg Forest.
Wow.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
I know. That's why I find it so interesting. interesting.
So okay, so there's so many questions to ask. All right, quick, easy question. Like you grew up in Belgium. Was it? I assume your father was stationed there, ergo you and
Yeah,
your mother were there.
yeah.
Um, did you move around Belgium, or was he
No,
strictly?
we were he was at Shape. The NATO headquarters was Shape in Belgium in Casteau, and so that's where we lived. We lived in a little village called Erchy outside of Casteau, and we lived there. And then we moved to Edmonton from there when I was like 12 years old. It was after the
Oh,
sixth. It was right after the sixth grade that we moved to
okay.
Edmonton. Yeah.
Now, the obvious next question comes: given you spent so much time in Europe, are you multilingual?
I speak French, but not very well. My wife's French is fantastic. Like mine is garbage. She speaks French and Italian. And mine is not so hot. I can understand, and I'm pretty confident that if I was in an environment where everyone was speaking French, it would really start to come back. But when we lived there, my French was really good because we'd speak it all the time.
Ah, okay. And one of our viewers, Bleecker Street down in Niagara, just shouting us out. And you mentioned some of the previous
Yeah,
work you've
yeah,
done.
yeah. I'm gonna ask her if she was on Hilarious, if she worked on Hilarious House of Frightenstein. She'll probably have stories, and she'll guarantee she'll know people. Santa's the legend.
Oh my god, that's awesome. Um, so I guess the just so it's concise and for the folks watching, whether it's live now or later pre-recorded, what is the specific story of Dead Romans, which I believe is going to be 6 issues,
Six
correct?
issues, yeah. We're working where there's a lot of talks about doing a second arc right now, and I've kind of been vocal about trying to make sure that people get their pre-orders in on for issue 5 so that the FOC numbers are strong.
Ah, okay.
To ensure that we get that second arc. That's what I would like to see that happen. But it's the Battle of Teutoburg Forest, and what we did which is a very dark, horrible, terrifying situation to be in. It's like a rain-driven, stormy swamp bog surrounded by death and destruction, and we put a love story right in the middle of it. Yes, exactly. Death, chaos, horror. It's all there. So the premise is you've got Arminius, he's the Roman general who's actually a Germanic prince, and he's been secretly plotting to like wipe the Romans off the map and drive them out of Germania forever. But he is in love with this Roman slave, and he is trying to. They've been separate. Yes, Honoria. They've been separated, and he is trying to find her amid the chaos while still trying to keep his army together and defeat the Romans. The problem, the rub, if you will, is that she's not just a slave. She's frumentarii. So she's like an agent, a spy, an assassin, a courtesan who is part of the governor's household.
Yeah.
And when he doesn't tell her what he's plotting, it really causes problems. And so she is really coming to grips with how could this guy that I love so much have been a snake in the grass the whole time? And was he just using our relationship and my trust in him to achieve his goals?
Mm-hmm.
And, it comes down to honesty and communication. Key in a relationship is really what it's saying,
Yeah, I mean, you know what? Be open, be honest, be fair.
Yes.
Shouldn't have any issues. Shouldn't cause any uprisings, any coups. Massive massacres in forests.
Absolutely, these things can happen. And
yeah.
when you read the story, the first 8 pages really do sum the whole story up. It's a very much a micro of the macro, and it's you've got a guy basically saying, I'm going to make you my queen. And she goes, does that make you a king? And he goes, it might. And he's basically, that's the closest he gets to telling her. And that's the opening scene of the story.
Which I love, by the way.
Yes. When you get back and you finish the series and go back and read it again, that scene takes on a whole new context. And it was frustrating in the pitching phase that sometimes that aspect wasn't coming across. And that could be my inability to be a strong pitcher, so to speak. and I looking back, I would have pitched the series as a little bit different than I did. But then again,
Interesting.
maybe I
Okay.
wouldn't because everything like landed the way I wanted it to.
I mean, it's worked.
It's
You've got
worked.
4 issues made so
It's
far.
worked. It's working. The system is working. But I there was one specific editor with IDW, and her name's Megan, and I got to give her massive props and gratitude. Like IDW rejected it, and
Oh.
then she wrote me back, and she's saying, you know what, it looks good. There's a lot of stuff there, but here's why we didn't want to do it. And I wrote back being like, can you just elaborate on this? And it was her feedback. Like, and I even said, I'm like, listen, I'm not trying to change your mind. I need to know what I'm doing wrong so that I can learn. And I think that there, like a lot of editors are used to people being combative and being like, you don't understand, I'm the best. I was like, what am I doing wrong? Like, help me get better. And she wrote back this amazing email about like, here's where I think you're trying to go, but I don't know because it's not in the pitch and I can't sign it if I don't know. And I'm like, okay. So I reworked my pitch when I was sending it out a second time, and it's because of her feedback. And I think that anybody out there who is pitching, like, don't take a no as an insult. You know, like sometimes a no is an opportunity to learn and to grow. And I'm very grateful that when I wrote her back, she took the time to give me a very well thought out, nuanced response, and I was very appreciative of it. Yeah, I think that affected the way the pitch that I sent out afterwards was put together.
That's incredible. Like, one, good for you to have the humility, the understanding, to be like, okay, I'm clearly doing something wrong.
Yeah.
And then to actually go back and ask. Because I think that takes a lot of courage to be like, why don't you like this thing?
Yeah.
Especially when it's something you're clearly very passionate about.
Well, yeah. The problem is people can take things very personally. And I think it's the way feedback, like, I'm not saying that if someone like sends you a tweet being like, you're garbage and I think you're horrible, you should be like, well, what am I doing wrong? I'm saying, but like when you're dealing with somebody in a professional setting and they're rejecting something that you take very personally, find out why. Like, have a discussion why. Like, don't expect them. Don't like demand an answer. Don't come at them with this mentality that you owe me. They don't owe you anything. You know, and anything you get, you should be grateful for. I think that that's what it comes down to. And that's for all of us that are like, sort of like looking for a seat at the table, you know? So yeah, that was a big factor in that process. But awesome. Nick's art really helped put it over. Like, let's be honest, Nick's like, wow, it's beautiful.
Yeah. Nick's art is absolutely stunning. It's so unique too. Like, forever, for the rest of my life, if I see a piece of art on a comic, or frankly probably anywhere, I will be able to go, oh yeah, that's Nick's.
Yeah.
Because it's
Have you seen his book, The Voyager?
I do. He sent it to me. I read it. It's awesome.
So good.
Yeah. Where did I go next with this? You know what? Let's keep with Nick. So your artist on the book is Nick Marinkovich, and then your editor is Allison O'Toole.
Yeah. Team.
Yeah. How did you hook up with them in order to make this book? What was that process like?
I've known Allison for a long time. And we'll start chronologically. So I worked with Allison first because Allison worked with Jason Lowe, on Pitiful Human Lizard. And I wrote 2 issues of PHL. I wrote the issues with Gull Girl.
Oh my God. Yeah.
So I wrote those issues with Allison was my editor on those. And so I really like Allison as a person. And I like Allison as a person because when I wrote those issues, I was just having a rough go in life. It was actually professionally, and it was bleeding into my personal life. Like, I was just not in a good space. I was not good mentally. And Allison, working with her was so nice, and she's so smart, and she's so good at what she does. And I feel like I've got a lot of in common with Allison, in that we both find it can be difficult to be assertive about things you believe in. And she taught me that that's an important thing to be, is to make sure that you fight for what you're believing in. And especially as a creator, And so working with her was really awesome. And then she was super professional, and she's very analytical, and I knew I needed that experience and that help. And so she was the first person I reached out to. Like, I knew exactly who I wanted to work with. And it was Allison. 100% it was Allison. Ride or die for Allison O'Toole.
Hell yeah.
And with Nick was, so I was terrified of Nick because he's really good. Yeah. And I don't have any at this point. Like, I've got some small books, some indie press books, but this is my moonshot. I'm shooting for the moon with this one. I need the best. And I was talking to Kalman Andrzejowski, and Kalman said, Nick is the one. He is the one to do this book. His style, he's heavy with his inks. Mm-hmm. He's going to make it sing. That's what you want. And so I just reached out to him, and yeah. And then when I messaged Nick, he was listening to a podcast about Rome at the time. And then he was like, apparently he said, he goes, I was like, I have to listen. This is fate reaching out. This is something I have to investigate this. And we went out for drinks, and we had decided before we finished drinks that we're doing it. We didn't even get to the money until the second conversation. We were like, we're so gung ho. We knew what we were doing for the opening pages. We knew what we wanted to do. We knew what we wanted to do pacing wise, et cetera, et cetera. I had the scene planned out with Honoria, and I sort of told him about, like, and she's in this wagon, and it opens up with the wagons, and the column is going through the forest, and she's in the wagon, and she's looking at the curtain flutter in the breeze, and then the fluttering curtain becomes the curtains around the bed of her reminiscing of the night before. And so and then he's like, yes. Like, so we got super into this, like, these like symmetrical visions. Like, we almost envisioned it like a singular image going across, right? Yeah. And so, like, as it all moving out, and I'm pretty confident we took the pages and flipped them together, like it would all flow, as a singular line.
That's cool.
So that was where we started out with that idea, going in that direction with it. And then Nick was wrapping a few other things, and then we got the pitch together and put it out. And and Nick and I have really, like, hit it off creatively. If the second arc happens, it's gonna be,
knock on wood.
Yeah. Well, yeah, make it happen, please. So if the second arc lands, we're gonna lean into a lot. It's gonna get darker. It's a much darker story. It's smaller scale but darker, and it gives everything a lot of closure, I guess you could say. But the second part would be very different, but, well, similar in terms of, like, its themes and stuff, but it'll be a smaller scale but much darker. Yeah. Okay. And I've talked to Nick about it. He's super stoked about what I want to do with it, because there's going to be things that didn't even appear in this book that'll be in the next one. Yeah,
I dig it. Then, you know what? One thing I definitely wanted to touch on was, as you've mentioned, this is based on actual history.
Yeah.
So Arminius, the main character, Honoria, I believe Honoria is a real person.
No, she's not. She's not real.
She's not. Okay.
We made her, honestly. The characters that are real, you've got Arminius is real. You've got Varus, Gaius Quintilius Varus. He's real. But everyone else is fake, except for the brief flashback of him as a kid with his dad and his brother. And maybe those characters will play a role if we do a second part. I don't know. But yeah, like that. So we had to create other characters to sort of, add some multi angles for it, because all these things, like the history that we understand that happened, comes from books and, like, breakdowns that were written decades after the fact,
Oh yeah.
So it's hard to like look through this and say that even with the most well-researched papers that you've got an accurate perception of what happened. All we've got is estimates, you know,
Mhm.
and you sort of estimate what happened based on other things. But the character Honoria and the character Regulus and the character Epo and all the other characters that we had to create and add into the story are all very well researched. Like Varus was the governor in Syria. And so I found out where he was living when he was in Syria. And Honoria is from that area. And she was a
Mhm.
household slave from that region. And then finding out what was the culture, because she's actually Greek because of the Alexandrian conquests of Syria a few hundred years before. And then you take a look at the religious practices that she would have. So she would be Hellenic, so she would worship these gods. And then before Varus was there, he was in Egypt. And so where would Regulus have come from? How would you have a guy who is African be in the legions? Well, that happened all the time. And so he is from here, which makes sense because the Romans were fighting with the Egyptians here, and here. And they were outnumbered there. So they brought in people from the civilian population and made them soldiers.
Huh.
So if you just take the time and look at where people came from, it can give you very plausible characters to put into those situations. And you just have to take, and honestly, when you read about that point in history, there's so many ways you can go with everything. Because the Romans had a very interesting practice where because they dealt with revolts a lot with
Mhm.
their legions and stuff. So if you've got legions in Germania, the soldiers that are in those legions are not Germanic. You put Gauls in those legions, you put Africans in those legions, you put Iberians in those legions. And
Mhm.
if you've got Germanic people that want to join, you send them to Africa so that when something goes wrong, you know where their loyalties are because they're
Yeah.
not fighting for the local population, they're fighting for the empire. So if you keep people going in different places, it makes it easier to keep
Interesting.
control. So at that point in time, the majority of the soldiers that were fighting in Germania for the legions were not locals. They were a lot of Gauls. There was a lot
Yeah.
of people from Italy. Like it's like, yeah. So the more you read about what the Romans were doing, they're some of the things that they were doing then are things that we still do today because they just
Oh,
work.
yeah.
Yeah. Not defending the Romans were terrible. I just want everybody to know that they were terrible, but everyone was also terrible at that time. Yeah.
So the next question that I now absolutely have to ask is, Fred, you've just given a very complex era of time that had a lot of warfare and did a really good job of explaining basically the political moves used to control soldiers,
Yeah.
what was going on. So you're rather knowledgeable about this. Um, how did you become so knowledgeable? Did you have did you study history? Is this just something you love?
I did
And
take history in high school. I took ancient civilizations all through high school, and I loved it. I absolutely loved it. I actually hosted a panel with Peter Weller once
ooh,
at Fan Expo, and he's got a PhD in ancient history, and he started going on and on and on about Alexander the Great, and then he started talking about how he never did anything wrong, and I was like, "What about Persepolis, Mister Weller? He burnt Persepolis to the ground." And then he starts trying to defend him, like, no. You don't get to defend it. You said it that he never did anything wrong. He was just as much of a butcher as everybody else. It's just that he's doing the butchering to people that butchered his people. He became what he hated. But I think, and I say this, I'm 44, so I grew up. We didn't have internet in the house, and I know this is going to sound silly, but I legitimately think that having access to whatever you want whenever you want it in terms of media content,
okay.
like Netflix and streaming and YouTube and all that, it's good. It's good. However, I wonder if I had had access to those things, would I have watched as many documentaries, as many historical pieces of programming as I did growing up if there
Hmm.
was other options? Because I remember when the TLC stood for the Learning Channel and it was
Yep.
like educational programming. And I can remember watching hours and hours of documentaries on ancient civilizations, biographies of historical figures, and all these complex pieces of television that my kids seldom watch because they're watching like Minecraft tutorials and stuff.
Yeah,
And it's like,
Mr. Beast and stuff.
yeah, it's like, that's cool, guys. I love that you're doing that. It's cool, but there's other things. I will say that there's these like extra credits YouTube videos, and it's
Oh
like
yeah,
these
yeah.
little short, like 7 to 10 minute little cartoons about documentaries about things. And my oldest, who's like 11 years old, has really started getting into them, and he watched this one about Genghis Khan, like, and he was trying to piece together, and then they start breaking down the numbers of the things that
Oh
Genghis Khan
God.
did, and I watched his brain like, what? That many people? What? Like, it's wild. So yeah, like, I'm trying to get their little brains to figure out all that stuff. So when you're asking like learning about that, I really think that it was like TLC, Discovery, A&E, PBS is another good one. All that stuff. I think that Carl Sagan has a great line in that when you talk to young children, they're so curious, they're so intrigued about everything. They want to learn, they want to learn, they want to learn. But something happens where we take that need for knowledge away from them.
Yeah.
So I think that I'm fortunate that I was always wanting to learn more things. And I know that I have probably like dropped incorrect facts or something at some point in this that somebody in the comments will pick up on. I'm not an expert, but I'm familiar enough with what I'm writing and what I was writing when I was doing the research to ensure that in the story my ducks are all in a row, you know?
Nice.
Yeah.
Specifically for the book, like, um, how did you research it? What did you do? What are the resources you went to make sure you could get those ducks in a row?
I listened to a lot of podcasts actually. Like Hardcore History was really like the first
Nice.
step into this specifically when I started researching the Barbarian disaster specifically. But there's all kinds of like resources you can find online outside of Wikipedia. A lot of people dump on Wikipedia. They really do. And I get frustrated with that in the sense that, is it 100% reliable? Not at all. But I think it's a great starting point. And I think that people that dump on Wikipedia are missing out on is there's an amazing section at the bottom of every article called the citations. And if you go to the citations, you can verify all these things from different sources. And sometimes those sources will have conflicting, like exactly references, citations. Those are the things that you want to look at. Like I say this on the radio a lot, like, if you don't find citations, it's not worth it. But the bibliographies, the citations, like, that's a great spot to start like finding the rights and the wrongs about everything. And so you can use that as a great spot to sort of like bounce back and forth on your research with. There's the online Encyclopedia Britannica is really good. And my father has a series of books called from Time Life Publishing, I think. And they're these books that have like, they dissect a specific like period in time, and they have sections for all around the world. That's like a really good source. Like Time Frame, I think they're called Time Frame is what these books are. And I had my dad send me the Time Frame book specifically for when the Barbarian disaster occurred. Also, Mental Floss, which is an amazing magazine, did this book called The Mental Floss History of the World. And they have a great breakdown about the Barbarian disaster in there as well. I'm a big advocate for Mental Floss. It's a great magazine for anybody that's looking for something good to read.
Hell yeah.
So those are like off the top of my head that I've got a list that I could give you after the show if you want.
No, but I think that's awesome. And one thing like that you mentioned, you grew up without a computer or without, I should say, internet.
We had a Commodore 64. I played Jumpman. I'm pretty
hell
good
yeah. One thing that I think maybe I'm not correct, I'm not sure, but because you went without the internet, I think maybe you've learned the physical research skills that, especially kids nowadays. And again, God, I just sound old saying that, but you mentioned it yourself. They have, because of this thing, they have access to whatever they want. They can just, go Google blah 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 blah, and they'll have it like that. So because you've got the hard skills for it, I think that might definitely be your advantage. Um, and the other thing I just wanted to mention for anyone out there, Wikipedia, your school may frown on it, but just as Fred mentioned, if you see something that's highlighted in blue and then you go down to
Yeah,
the bottom and hit that citation, you now have a legit source you can verify.
totally. So that like I would never try and win an argument with Wikipedia,
Mm-mm.
but I definitely begin my military campaign there, is what I'm saying. Like
Yes.
that's my mustering ground right there for recruitments. Right there is Wikipedia. And yeah, like and sometimes people get very snooty about it. And if I've read a lot of historical fiction books about the Varian disaster outside of that, Ben Kane, Con Iggulden, like those are two of my favorite. I've honestly, if I could get my book into the hands of either one of those guys, I'd love it. Like I'd love it. Con Iggulden has written some of my absolute favorite books. His books about the War of the Roses in the UK. Oh, they're so good. They're absolutely so great. Edward the Fourth. I always talk about Edward the Fourth. He's such a fascinating character. Yeah.
On Eggleton, you said?
Con Iggulden. Connigulden. Con Iggulden.
Yeah, I was never gonna get that.
Yeah. Con Iggulden is fantastic. He's one of my favorites in terms of like writing historical fiction. Absolutely.
Okay. Let's just and so
Yeah.
this is just again, it's just come up. I've
Yeah.
not looked through his catalog,
Conquer.
but
Those are his books about Genghis Khan, the Conqueror series.
oh, cool.
Yeah.
Very cool. So
Yeah,
Con
yeah.
Eggleton, definitely someone that you can dig into.
Yeah. I'm a big historical fiction guy. I love historical fiction. I think it's great.
So okay, here's something that's been sort of on my mind now because we've talked about the research, the what we can glean of the reality of the situation, as well as obviously fiction.
Yeah.
When it comes to writing all of this, how do you walk the line between history and fiction? Where because I'm certain some fact somewhere you've had to go, this isn't really going to fit. Forget it.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
So
It's a story. Everything needs to serve the story.
yeah,
Everything serves the story. And is the story the plot or the characters? I think it's sort of a mix of both. I think the characters are what attaches people to a great story, but great characters with a dumb plot is just as useless as a great plot as bad characters. They both need to be there. Like both those things need to work together to create a great story. And you could have a bunch of different writers debate over what is important or not. I think that if you look at Star Wars is an amazing setting, unbelievably fascinating characters with an okay story. Like, but we love those characters so much. Like, I love Star Wars so much, and I love those characters. But is it like the most groundbreaking story ever? It's like plot ever? Not really. But it's cool, and we love the characters. And then there's stories where the plot is so good and filled with so many twists, but the characters, like, I don't really care about the characters. I'm just following along. I love it so much, So it's like it's very different for me when I'm writing historical fiction. It's got to be a cool story, and it's the way I try and frame it in my head is, what is it about this historical event that makes me so fascinated by it? And with this story, with the Teutoburg, you've got to imagine the reality of the situation. You are a human being, okay? And you are in a column. And as far as you can see that way, and as far as you can see that way, is people marching. And all of a sudden you stop. And in the distance, you hear screaming and you hear yelling, but you can't see anything. And then it starts to rain, and it's storming, and the rain is falling, and you're in the woods, and all you hear is fighting and battle, but there's chaos. No one knows what's going on. And to this side is swamp, and to that side is forest. Where do you go? What do you do? Imagine the terror as once you start moving again, you're marching, and then there's just dead bodies everywhere. And then all of a sudden, like, arrows start flying out of the woods at you, and you're like, you don't know what's going on. And there's legitimate human terror involved in the situation. And so there's some great scenes in this issue. Issue 4, I absolutely adore because there's a great scene where you've got 3 characters, Ippo, Regulus, and Honoria, are trying to hide in a swamp, and they're hiding amongst dead bodies that have been butchered and sacrificed, and they're in the dark, and all around them they can hear screams of people being burned alive, sacrificed, etc. And they're surrounded by it, and they're just hiding in the mud trying to get through. And that's terrifying. That's legitimate horror. And so I'm trying to think about that, like, there you go. That's the stuff. So
The
I'm
bodies just
everywhere. They got 50,000 people. That's what's happening to all of them. And I'm thinking to myself, like, that's what's compelling. That's terrifying. Nobody is going to be in that situation. So it's horrible. Like, we talk about, like, there's so much written about horror, such a big genre, horror, like supernatural body horror and all that. And I love it. Everybody loves everything. Do what you got, like what you like, you know? But this is reality. This is to me, this is as horrifying as it gets.
Mm-hmm.
You know, this is like Schindler's List, I think, is one of the greatest horror movies ever written. Absolutely, like, ever created. I would put that as an amazing horror movie. And it has, to me, the most chilling scene with the girl hiding in the outhouse. Like, to me, that is the most gut-wrenching, horrifying thing that I think I've ever seen on a movie screen.
Yeah.
And it's a child. And the nature of those things, those real life horror, for me, is scarier because those things happened and they could happen again. And I think is like a cautionary tale. I think people need to educate themselves on things like this. Now, when I talk about in the story, it's these Romans that are being sacrificed and they're being butchered alive, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And you even got the Regulus has the line in it, these Germans do love their sacrifices. Yeah. It's like, yeah, they do. But what have the Romans been doing them for the last 60 years? So it's like they created this storm. Like, this is their comeuppance. And it's just, there's arguments on both sides of this story, but both sides are doing terrible things to the other because of the terrible things that were done to them. And that in turn means more terrible things are going to happen to them.
Yep.
And it's just a cycle. And there's a line, it's in the second issue when, or is it the first issue? I think it's the second issue. When Arminius is talking to one of the German tribal leaders, and they're like the Romans are on their heels. We attack them now. He goes, well, yeah, we could attack them now and we'll probably win. But what happens when they come back? Because they will come back. Will we have enough people to fight them then? So it's like he's doing this knowing there will be blowback on him, you know?
You know what, Fred? This is so interesting for me. So because of the sake of doing what I do and reading as many comics as I do, I get to see a lot of different ways that people want to tell stories. And with what you've just spoken about, it's so like crystal clear magnifying glass illustrates why this book is set up the way it is. Because like you said, the setting itself, it's in a forest, lots of rain, crappy weather, a lot of people dying, not a good place to be. But that could be illustrated in so many different ways.
Oh, it's because of Nick. He's the best.
Oh yeah, Nick is doing killer work here. But like, that could be illustrated so many different ways, and yet every time, like, just to show the first page again or the first book again, this scene, like this specifically, that's sort of what you're talking about. You've got like just insane amounts of people ahead of you and behind you, and you're just moving. And then when the fighting breaks out, when all hell breaks loose and the blood starts, the way that all of these fight scenes are drawn, it does feel boxed in, and it's fascinating. So Nick is clearly picking up what you're laying down when it comes to
we had all kinds of talks about this.
Yeah.
So, like when I write, so my scripts, when I send them to Nick, I'll break down about, this is what's on the panel. Okay. This is what's on the panel. This is what's important. This is how it needs to feel. So you got to touch on those 3 things for me. And there's sometimes, like, he sent me a panel and it's like, he sent me the description. He goes, I love the description that you wrote here. And it's like, he's coming over the top and he looks, this is it. It's all coming right now. All 6 issues. This is where it all hits its fan right now. And then he wrote it back, and I'm like, I don't even know what this is about. He goes, but I get it. I get exactly what you're saying. He's like, I'm on it. I'm so there. I can't wait. I cannot wait for the final issue to drop. And I'm really, really proud of the story that we've told and the way that it looks and everything about it. I'm very, it's the story that I wanted to do.
Mhm.
And I'm very appreciative that you're picking up on those aspects of big, small, because the scale is big, but all of our perspective is very small. And there's to me, it's a really cool scene at the very end of this issue in particular. And it's at the very, very end of it. It's the very last scene. And it's just 2 random guys that you don't know. You've never seen them. You're probably never going to see them again. And they're just talking about the reality of what is going on in the woods right now. You know exactly the scene that I'm talking about.
I'm looking at it.
Yeah. And it's just these 2 guys, and they're just regular Roman soldiers. And at this point, it's basically like, here we are. We got to get out, and you really get the sense of they're stuck, and they know that they're stuck. And that line, they deserve better. We all deserve better. And it's just like, yeah, that scene that they're talking, and I'm not going to give anything away, but what they're talking about is something that I read about happening repeatedly. And when you read that, and you're like, how do you even know what to do? Like, it's because Arminius was a tactical genius. He knew exactly what to do to throw the Romans off, and everything went off perfectly. And there's a great thing that great commanders throughout history have been consistently good at, and it is delegation of authority.
Mhm.
So Arminius had his close-knit auxiliary cavalry officers that he trusted, and those were the guys that he put in specific spots to do exactly what he needed, because those were the most disciplined guys that he had that would follow orders.
Yeah.
And I sort of inferred that Arminius had this idea of creating a Germanic Rome, if that makes any sense. That's my own perspective. Like, he wanted to create a unified Germanic tribal kingdom with their own cultural practices, but with the organization of something akin to Rome. Now, you could argue that that's like sort of like a pipe dream. Or you could argue that's not what he wanted to do. He's just an egomaniac who wanted to be a king. I'm trying to make him a character that has a much more noble goal. But in terms of like a character analysis of Arminius, I don't want to ruin anything. I feel like
no spoilers for 5
no,
or
there's no
6
spoilers.
or even 4.
You know what? I could do a character breakdown of him when the arc is done. But I think that there's a very, very, very pivotal scene at the very, very end. Okay. I'm not
Don't do it.
Yeah, I'm not going to do it. I want to, though. I'm excited. I want to talk about it. But it's like, I'm really stoked for everybody to see what's coming. And there's actually something that I can't talk about. Jose Villarrubia, who did the colors.
Oh, okay.
He did a cover for us. And wow.
Okay.
I'm just gonna say wow. Like when Nick got super emotional about it. When I told my friend Valentin Delandro, that we had Jose doing the colors for us, like, he lost his mind because Aerosmith is like his all-time favorite comic book, and he was like, "No way, no way!" Like, he does this thing where he goes, like, his face, and he popped his eyebrows up pretty high when we dropped that on him. Yeah.
Amazing.
So yeah, there's some great stuff in the pipes. I am very, very excited for issue 5. Like, I really hope that everybody gets those pre-orders in on the FOC so that we can get that second arc. I think that'll be really good. And the special edition hardcover, Jim has been sending us the look for the cover and all that stuff. I'm very fortunate to have the team that I have with me doing this book.
I love it. You know, we're in like the last 9.5, 10 minutes of the show, so I've got some other stuff I want to ask you about. But one thing that has come up in my brain is, are you no? What other comics have you written? I'm really curious now because for me, I never realized you'd written the Gull Girl issues of
So Gull Girl, for
Pitiful Human
starters,
Lizard.
Gull Girl was a character in the True Patriot anthology series that Jay Torres put together, and me and Adam Gorham did those. And
Oh,
so when Chapter House started publishing True Patriot, Stories of True Patriot, we decided that we were going to incorporate Gull Girl because she's silly and hokey
yeah.
into Pitiful Human Lizard. But Gull Girl's arch nemesis is actually a guy called the Blue Noser, who is like the East Coast superhero, the defender of McNabb's Island. But the first book I ever did, well, I did some like 24-hour comic book challenges, but my first book was this historical fantasy series called Teuton, the Teuton, with Adam
Teuton.
Gorham. That was like the first book that I really did, and we did 3 trades of that book, and it was a black and white sort of like Prince Valiant supernatural kind of story, and I love that book. I always tell Adam one day we'll do it. Oh yeah. Yeah, Teuton. Yeah. That was like me and Adam when we started out. And so I did that, and then I did some shorts in the Monstrosity series. I had a book series with whatchamacallit, Chapter House, called The Fourth Planet with Miko Maciejczyk, which is, if ever there's a book that makes me emotional, it's The Fourth Planet. That was like a total work of love, and it's super hard sci-fi. You can still buy the trades. Like, I think that book is
Whoa, what a
gorgeous.
cover.
Like, it is absolutely gorgeous. I cannot recommend it enough. Like, I absolutely love that book. And then I kind of like fell off comics. I was doing like a radio play for a while, a Star Wars radio play called Mud 79, which I just remastered the first season, and then I'm doing
that one.
That's the one. Yeah. So I remastered the first season. I revoiced it, remixed it, redid everything, and then the second season is underway right now, and there will be a new episode of Mud 79 dropping every single Thursday for the next 32 weeks. It's not going to be until end of January. I don't think that's when it wraps up, and it's Platoon meets Star Wars. I could talk for hours about Mud 79. That's like basically I watched the Ken Burns Vietnam documentary, and then I applied that to Star Wars, because there's some really telling stories about the Vietnam War, about like these young guys that they're like, my dad fought in the Second World War, and all his best friends were the guys that he fought in the war with. My cousins fought in the Korean War, and all their best friends were the guys they went and fought in Korea with. So when Vietnam came, that was my time. That was my time to go to war. And so in this story, and I break it down very simply, because you're talking about a guy who's fighting for the empire. So you've really got to throw some context in right away, because immediately you hate him. So he explains how his family was on this like farming world, a small little backwater farming world. And during the Clone Wars, the Trade Federation was coming in, and they were going to obliterate the planet completely and like industrialize it and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And they didn't want that. And it was the Republic that liberated them. And those were really hard times for them. When the Republic came, his family went and signed up to fight for the Republic. So now it's just a new flag. That's his perspective. He's
interesting.
16 years old. He doesn't want to work as a farmer. He knows he's not good enough at Limmy to make it on the pro Limmy circuit. So him and his friends go into town. They all get drunk, and then they join the army. They sign on the dotted line. And within the first 2 minutes, I've explained this is what happened. And then he joins the army, and he slowly over the course of the story realizes that what he signed on for is not what he signed on for. But at no point do I take the side that he thinks the rebellion are in the right, because this is 5 years after the end of the Clone Wars, is when Mud 79 takes place.
Oh, okay.
And so his perspective on things is that the people that hate the Empire were really just people that were making a lot of money when the Republic was in charge. And I don't remember, I know that everyone dumps on The Last Jedi, but I think The Last Jedi, which had its flaws, I think it also had some of the greatest ideas that have ever been put into Star Wars, period. When Benicio del Toro says, these people make weapons for the same side. It really put things into perspective for me as a Star Wars fan, is in the perception of Star Wars is changing, in the sense that the Republic was probably, and when you watch the Clone Wars, the animated series, you realize the Republic is really corrupt. And so the Empire is also really corrupt. And it's what happens to the little people. And so Mud 79 is all the little people dealing with their problems. And all the people, the characters that are in there, they all have their own reasons. And some of them don't really like the Empire, but it was better than the other side. And so I think it's really strong. And it's like growing up in a military family, like having so much experience in the military. There's a lot of unique personalities that you will encounter that are there for their very own specific reasons. And yeah, thank you, Jason. But that idea is something I really wanted to put in the forefront of Mud 79, and it's a very human story about a young guy. And I think that when we're young, we're so sure of our opinions, and we're so confident in everything we say. And he's writing this book about his youth, looking back on how stupid he was at the time, but how much he fervently believed it, and being honest about, like, at the time, and like, there's a lot of times when I'm writing, like, at this point, I thought this, but I know better now. So I've got the second season midway done. The third season is arced out. I even have, and I've got this in my back pocket, if I ever get to like write my own Star Wars story, like in the new era, I want to write the story from his daughter's perspective.
Oh, cool.
Her.
Okay.
Like, I want her to be the main character if I was going to write a story. And I've got a really cool, like, Dr. Aphra kind of thing going on. I'm ready to go. Hey, if you're listening, Star Wars, I'm here. Drop me a line. We'll make it happen.
Love it. I love the passion for it. It's fantastic. We are at like minute and a half left for the hour.
Yeah.
So you know what? I'll wrap it up with my two last questions for you. So often I find folks that create comics are themselves comics fans. And along with that tends to be, you know, being rather nerdy or whatever you want to call it, being a collector of things. I imagine you probably have a number of cool Star Wars things, but for you, what is the crown jewel of your collection? Maybe not the most expensive, maybe not the most rare, but that thing, what is it?
Yeah. So you read Invincible?
Absolutely.
So you know the big double splash of Conquest's face, and it's just his face that comes up and enters the talk bubbles? I have the inks.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Okay.
So my wife got the inks like the same week the floppy came out for a birthday present for me. And she got on it because at that time, Invincible wasn't the big comic that it is now.
It was little.
So she got the inks for me, and I'll get into a little bit of the story. I know we're going to go a little bit over.
Go for it.
So she got the inks for me. Now, the pencils got destroyed. The pencils got destroyed in a flood. A basement flooded, and the original inks, the pencils got destroyed, but the inks are still around. So I brought them with me to San Diego Comic-Con, and this is right when The Walking Dead is exploding. And this is like, so I got Ryan Otley to sign them, and Cliff Rathburn was right next to him. And so Cliff Rathburn goes, I made some modifications when I went over the inks digitally. Can you leave the inks here overnight so that I can touch them up so that they match what's in the page? So if you put them together in a frame, it'll all line up. And I'm like, absolutely. And so I left them with him overnight, and I went back the next day, and both Ryan Otley and Craig Rathburn was like, Rob was just here, and he was livid that we had these here, and he wants these pages. He wants them back. And I'm like, why didn't he sign them? And they're like, he's not going to sign them because he wants to buy it back from you. And I'm like, ugh. And so this was the right after The Walking Dead was like blowing up. Robert Kirkman was on the program for Comic-Con for like San Diego Comic-Con that year. And I was going up to a panel to do interviews because I was there for Teletoon. Yeah. And he is walking along. Robert Kirkman is walking along with his entourage, right? And like he's got security with him.
Yep.
And so I'm like, there he is. This is my chance to get this signed. And so he's walking along. I'm like, Mr. Kirkman, can you sign something? And he glanced back, and I held open the page, and he just stopped. And this is, if you've ever like been to San Diego Comic-Con, like you've got all like the theaters behind you, and then these big open hallways. So I'm holding it open, and he stops in the middle and like makes his security come with him back through the crowd. And he like holds it, and he goes, do you want to sell this to me? And I go, my wife got this for me for a birthday present, so I can't. And he goes, okay. He just
nice
right away. And he goes, I can tell you love your wife. And then he signed it. And he just sat there looking at it. He goes, I would have given you a lot of money for this. You gave it back to me. And then that was it. So I've got it like all three signatures with the original inks on a wall. And I forked out the extra money for the UV glass to ensure it doesn't fade. So it's imperfect. That is my crown jewel collector item. That's my big thing that I have. And when I got it, like my wife got it for like less than $600. Like, but this is like 15 years ago.
Oh, exactly. Invincible was this small little thing that
I think it was only like I think they had like 10 trades out of that time. Like now it's like what 30 and 4 omnibuses and all that. So at the time it wasn't a big deal. But and to give credit, it's my tattoo artist Tony Sklepik. Every time he's recommended a book to me, I've absolutely loved it. And it was him that got me on Invincible, because I was kind of like, I only read Vertigo. I don't read any of these superhero things, except for Annihilation Wave. I absolutely love the Annihilation Wave. That's one of my all-time favorite arcs from Marvel. But yeah, like, so I got into Invincible, and I fell so hard for Invincible. I love it so much.
Awesome. That is sick. Absolutely props to your wife for being able to track down the artist and get the pages.
She's the best
hands down. That is incredible. Then you know what, as mentioned, we are a little past the hour.
Sorry.
So my last question for you, Fred, is who do you think we should interview next?
Ian Flynn would be a really good interview. Ian Flynn did all the Mega Man comics and the Sonic comics, and he was one of the writers on the new Sonic game. He's amazing. Sam Meggs, you can track her down. That's an interview. She's amazing. I love Sam so much. She's just a genuinely great human being. Heather Antos, who former editor at Marvel, did all the Star Wars stuff, who's actually a voice actor in Mud 79, if you must know. Elias Tufexis, a great VO guy, like a VO god. Mark Meir, the voice of Commander Shepard from Mass Effect, another good one.
Okay.
What else? Who else? Michael Walsh, Adam Gorham. Adam Gorham, who is like, could possibly be my best friend in the whole universe because I adore him so much, is this incredibly quiet guy. But when you get him in a setting like this, he is the best sketch duel guest you can have.
Okay.
He has this amazing ability to turn it on. And he is the funniest guy. I think Adam is one of the funniest human beings ever. So Adam Gorham is another great local talent. There you go.
All right. I will go. You know what? I'll reach out to heck all of them. Why not? I've, as maybe you've heard, I've been typing as you've been naming them off.
Yeah.
And it looks like a lot of them are actually Canadian American or just straight up Canadian.
Yeah.
So that's fantastic. Always
Yeah.
happy to showcase what cool Canadian folks are doing in the worlds of comics and otherwise. So Fred, absolutely. Thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show tonight.
Thank you for letting me be here. It was an absolute blast. I'm sorry if I got rambly. I'm sorry.
Oh, I love it. And do me a favor, Fred, let the people out there know where can they follow you, where's best to support you, all that good stuff.
At fearless_Fred on Twitter and on Instagram. And Dead Romans issue 5. The final order cutoff is on Monday. Like I've mentioned, several of the motif of this interview, we're pushing for that strong FOC performance to help them, like, you know, in case Eric's paying close attention to those numbers, to give us a second arc. It'd be very nice if you could do that for me. Yeah, so that's that. Yeah.
Perfect. You heard it here, folks. Go to your local comic shop, get orders in for Dead Romans number 5. Ideally, pick up the rest of the series too, just so you know what's going on, because it's awesome. And yeah, once again, Fred, thank you. And for the folks out there in YouTube land, like, comment, subscribe. Let me know what you thought of Fred down below. Click all the links that are down below because they will take you to Fred's stuff. And we'll see you next time.
Golden age to present, digest to oversize. Never miss new comic day. Yeah, no surprise. So where's my no prize? Check the letter columns. Can't find issue 2? Nah. Collector problems, cliffhangers, mysteries. You need answers. When did Batman become Green Lantern? I get it. True believer, not lying. Always up for an awesome summer crossover.